Good to be bringing the devotion again today. And like Lauren read, it's on Mark chapter 1, verse 29 through 39, which I find to be a very interesting passage and I think has lots of items to teach us. And in the reading in today's gospel, Jesus has rolled into town, into Capernaum, and it's the most exciting thing going on for miles and miles. It's the small little town, Capernaum, little fishing village on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. And there's a preacher who's come to town by the name of Jesus, a guy from Nazareth. And some say he's a preacher, some say he's a magician, some say he's a crazy man, don't pay attention to him, false teacher. And it seems that most of the people in town decide to come out and decide for themselves who this Jesus character really is. And everybody showed up. And not only have they come out and showed up, they've also brought everybody with them, especially the sick and feeble in the town. I imagine they've wheeled out grandma and grandpa in their wheelchairs out to hear what Jesus has to say, because they've also heard that there might be some healing going on. It's kind of like I was thinking of it if I was like casting this as a movie in a contemporary time. It's like those country tent revival preachers where they come into town, set up. Everybody comes out to hear him, the whole family. And to many folks' surprise, there is a lot of healing that goes on. A lot of people who could not see before, and now they can, who could not walk before, and now they can, who had leprosy, and now they have smooth, silky skin, who were possessed and no longer are possessed. It says that Jesus drove out those who were demon possessed. And he even heals Simon Peter's mother-in-law. And one of the funny things I think about this passage, and there's probably lots of theological elements to it as well, to this thing, but as soon as he heals Simon Peter's mother-in-law just immediately starts like cooking and taking care of the people that are there that day, which is kind of a neat part of the story. Well, the news spreads and more people come. People have been possessed, people have been crippled, people who just want to see what's going on. And it's truly the biggest show in town, probably the biggest thing that's happened in Capernaum in forever. The place everybody wants to be. And finally at night, after all the healing, all the preaching, they call it quits, they turn the lights off, they usher the folks out, and they tell people to go home. And I know there's probably more to be done, but just come back tomorrow, we'll finish it tomorrow. Come back tomorrow, we'll finish it tomorrow. Well, tomorrow never really comes, however, because when everybody shows up the next morning, ready for some more healing and more preaching, the main act is nowhere to be found. Jesus is gone. He's scooted out of town. He's gotten out of the house before anybody could find him. And he was the biggest thing that, like I said, that had happened in this town forever. Everybody wanted to see him. Everybody wanted some healing or to witness a miracle or to hear what he had to say. But the morning comes and Jesus is AWOL. He's gone. They can't find him. And scripture says that he had gone to a deserted place to be alone and pray, away from the crowd, away from the demands, away from the responsibilities, away by himself. Some people say, well, look, Jesus, the introvert, he needed some time alone. And I don't know, maybe Jesus is an introvert, maybe he was an extrovert. I don't think that's necessarily what the passage is getting at. But I think it's perhaps more than just that, more than just Jesus being introverted or wanting time to himself. I think that there are some lessons here for us as followers of Christ. For one, perhaps it's a reminder that the most pressing thing in front of us is not always the most important thing. That the most pressing thing in front of us is not always the most important thing. Jesus has just healed all these people. This whole town is full of people that have been healed, but there are still more, I imagine. There are more people to be healed. There are more people to be touched. They want to hear more from Jesus. They have more people who need something from Jesus. They are busting down the door in the morning, and there is much more work left to do in Capernaum. The top of the to-do list for the disciples is to make sure they get all the people that want to see Jesus to see Jesus. I imagine they line them up in a neat order. They get them ready to see him, get the healing room ready, set up the podium, getting ready for his talks or his messages. And I mean, Jesus is about to be very busy this morning. No time to waste. He may need to skip breakfast. Sometimes I feel like I need to skip breakfast because I got to get right to my to-do list. Maybe he should skip his morning prayers because he's got more important stuff to take care of and only so many hours in the day. But instead, Jesus, instead of taking care of the pressing items right in front of him, instead of doubling down on productivity and miracle output, you got to get more miracles out today. We got to get all these miracles out today. Instead, in some ways, he gets the heck out of Dodge early in the morning, knowing he can skip town before everybody comes rushing in. And why? Why does he do that? I don't know exactly. I mean, it doesn't explicitly say why he does that. But for some reason, Jesus is not dead set on maximizing productivity and getting right to his urgent to-do list like we are oftentimes. And in a society often focused on to-do lists, on productivity, on tasks, and taking care of everything right in front of us, perhaps it's a good reminder that Jesus seems not to be interested in any of that. That sometimes the most urgent thing in front of us is not the most important thing to us. Even when the work he's doing is very important, it doesn't diminish the work that he was doing. I mean, the work he was doing was very much important, but Jesus does not seem to operate with the urgency of the world. And I think we all do well to follow Jesus by, at times, taking a rest, stepping back, and not being entirely focused on the urgent tasks in front of us. When you look at the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, the idea of Sabbath is very much important to the people of God, that there are times where you take rest, where you cannot work yourself to death. And it even goes to the land. I mean, the land gets a Sabbath. You cannot work the land to death. God himself took a Sabbath while creating the earth. And like I said, sometimes it's important to take a reset, to step back and not be entirely focused on what the most urgent task in front of us is, even when those tasks are important. And also, it's not like Jesus is just lazy or tired. That's not what's happening at all. The story is not just Jesus not taking care of the urgent. And it's not just Jesus skipping out on responsibilities either. That's not it at all. It's much more than that simplistic view, because where does Jesus go? When Jesus does this, when Jesus kind of skips town early in the morning, where does Jesus go? He goes to a deserted place to pray. Some translations call it a lonely place, deserted place, somewhere by himself. He didn't go sit on his phone for hours or go work on another project the whole day. He didn't watch TV or fool around all morning. He went to a deserted place to pray, a deserted place. And I will tell you this, I think you all know, I'm very much an extroverted person. I don't like to go to deserted places. I especially don't like to be alone by myself. I'd rather be with a big group of people. I'd rather be with people walking around somewhere with a bustling street or something. I really don't like to go to a deserted place or be by myself. But I've come to realize, and I think one of the things Jesus seems to indicate throughout his ministry is that humans need solitude at times, that we need to find ourselves alone. We need to find ourselves in deserted places, because there, by ourselves, many times we're forced to reckon with ourselves, to face our fears, our passions, our joys, our sorrows, our temptations, our ambition, our dreams, our feelings, our emotion, to face ourselves in all of the glory and in all of the sorrow that makes up who we are, that we're forced to face ourselves and what are our priorities in life? What are the things that we're doing and why are we doing those things? And sometimes we all need to be alone. And I don't like saying that because, again, I don't like being alone. But solitude seems to be quite an important part of the Bible. Again, even in the Old Testament, you look at Abraham and Moses and David and Solomon, there are a lot of times where the stories about those people are where they find themselves alone with themselves and with God. Sometimes we all need to be in those deserted places. And it's not all peace and quiet, though. It's not all relaxation by finding a nice place to sit for a while, or, my deserted place is on a beach in Honolulu or something like that. Sometimes it's not about geographic location at all. There there are times in life where this solitude, this loneliness is kind of thrust upon us. We are thrust into a deserted place, not because we wanted to, but because it's just kind of where life has led us. Whether it be through the loss of someone that we love, or the sadness of an action done to us, or the end of a relationship, or the loneliness of our emotions, or the loss of a job or an opportunity or a tragedy. Sometimes against our will, we are forced into these deserted places where we kind of have to sit with ourselves. And that could be really scary, I think. In those deserted places, we are often forced to reckon with ourselves in ways that we have not done so before, to wrestle with our own thoughts and with Satan, just as Jesus did in the desert. That Jesus too found himself where he was wrestling with the temptations of Satan in the desert. And sometimes the deserted places are forced upon us, and other times, sometimes the deserted places are sought out by us when we determine we need to be alone and think about something through, that we need to be alone and pray, that we need to be alone and think. Sometimes a deserted place are simply the moments in time where we're convicted by a word, an action, a message, and then for days or weeks or months, we wrestle with that encounter and it forms who we are and what we do. Sometimes a deserted place is not just one day where we're by ourselves, but it could be a couple of weeks or months or years where there's something in our mind that we're kind of going back and forth about. Will Willimon tells a story about how he once received an agitated telephone call on a Sunday evening from a church member. And the church member said that his daughter Anne had just out of nowhere decided to drop out of pharmacy school. And Anne had been home for the weekend when she told her parents this. And in fact, she had been at church that morning with her mother and father. And the news of her leaving school, dropping out of pharmacy school, had caught them totally by surprise. And Willimon asked the father, well, why is she dropping out of pharmacy school? And the father didn't know. He was uncertain. What he mainly wanted to do is he wanted Willimon to call his daughter Anne and, quote, talk some sense into her. So Willimon called Anne, the daughter, and reminded her of the many hours that she had already put into school and of her many academic achievements, and all of which now she was just kind of throwing out the window and throwing away because she was going to drop out of pharmacy school. And he said, how in the world did you come to this decision, Anne? And Anne responded, well, Mr. Willimon, it was your sermon yesterday that started me thinking about it, actually. And he got real red in the face, and she went on to describe how her own experience of a lonely place, a desolate place that she had been in for months, that she wasn't really enjoying what she was doing. And she realized and admitted to herself that she was in pharmacy school just to earn money and just to kind of gain prestige. And Willimon's sermon had emphasized the call of God, which comes to all of us, that God has something important for all of us to do. And the sermon had caused Anne to remember the times in which she worked with immigrant populations, teaching English and teaching them the gospel. And it reminded her that's what she really wanted to do, that she felt like she genuinely wanted to serve God and not serve herself. And she told Willimon that after the sermon, she decided to leave school and give her life to helping people. That's what she wanted to do. And Willimon writes about this. He says that there was a long silence on the end of the telephone. And then he just said, now look, Anne, I was just preaching. Sometimes you don't need to take that so seriously. Which is a funny story, but again, sometimes we are met with these moments in time where something hits us, where something strikes us, and we have the Spirit works on us for weeks or months, and those too can be desolate or lonely places sometimes, but we emerge with commitment to God. And so Anne discovered a desolate place, hearing that sermon and the words ringing around in her head, making her contemplate what she was doing and why. And whether the desolate places are forced upon us or whether we seek them out or they just kind of occur in everyday life, Jesus seems to indicate that these desolate places, these times alone with ourselves, are important for us spiritually, psychologically, socially, and I would say physically too. That again, you cannot wear yourself down just working all the time and worrying all the time about what the next thing is and what the next thing you're going to do. And there are times where we pray, we think, and we wrestle with our thoughts. Times ultimately where we reevaluate what we're doing and what we are to do next. Jesus's time in his desolate place reminded him of why he was here on earth, what he was meant to do. And again, he had many pressing issues to take care of in Capernaum. But he also had other places to go, more people to see, a message to get out there. We all need to take time to reevaluate our own lives. The chapters that make up our lives have beginnings and ends, and sometimes we may not be alert to realize when one needs to end and when one needs to begin until we sit with ourselves alone and think. And being by yourself with only your thoughts, your feelings, and ideas, again, can be a scary place for some people. I think we sometimes ignore these hard conversations with ourselves because we're afraid to be with ourselves. Sometimes we don't like ourselves. We're afraid to confront ourselves, whether it be because of shame or ignorance or guilt or worry or whatever. But that doesn't take away the fact that knowing yourself is part of what the gospel is that we are children of God, and we have to sit with that sometimes. We have to sit with the implications of what that means. Jesus had a lot to do in the city of Capernaum. He had a lot of people who were depending on him there. He had crowds of people who still needed lots of things from him. The work he was doing there was vitally important. The work was not unimportant. It was vitally important. And he could have spent his whole life just there in that town, helping those specific people. And it would have been a worthy and noble cause, truly, just to sit there and help those people. But he couldn't do that. He needed to take a moment to be by himself, to pray, to reflect, to think. And what did Jesus discover in this process? He discovered that what he was doing there was good. In fact, it was urgent. But at the end of the day, he had to go elsewhere and meet other people and do different things, because the message of Christ, his mission, was more than just one task, one town, more than one to-do list, more than one group of people. It was more expansive than just that. And to end, I'd like to just read the last part of the passage again and for us to sit with it for a little bit. So Mark chapter 1. When they found him, they said to him, "Everyone is searching for you." He answered, "Let us go on to the neighboring towns so that I may proclaim the message there also. For that is what I came out to do." And he went throughout Galilee, proclaiming the message in their synagogues and casting out demons. Amen. For our reflection today, I'd like to just kind of open it up and ask you all to reflect on the idea of taking time to just be in solitude. And part of this actually comes out of classes that Jody taught about the importance of the spiritual discipline of just being alone sometimes, of having solitude. Because I think, again, we live lives that are so busy that we can lose track of what we're doing and why we're doing it. And Jesus takes a lot of naps. I mean, that happens throughout the Bible. He takes a nap during a huge storm on a boat. There's a spiritual discipline of taking naps and resting and Sabbath. And again, it's not being lazy. It's taking that time so you can reevaluate who you are, what you're doing, and why you're doing it. So any thoughts on that?
Matt, Stephanie, and I have been to Capernaum, and the striking thing when you look at the archaeological ruins there is how tight the little town is. I mean, it's small rooms, narrow streets, and you just kind of envision all of this activity in these crowds, not really in a big open place, but in a very compact, dense area. But it's also small. I mean, it's not very large. And my guess is, everybody there would have known Jesus. They just would have known what his role was, and maybe that he was God's son. But it's, you know, it's like small town. They would have known, yeah, this Jesus guy from just up the road. But not far away from Capernaum is a mountain. I think it's called Mount Arabah, if I remember correctly. And I've often wondered if that's where Jesus went to be alone. It kind of looks over the Sea of Galilee. But when we read about, you know, all the people in the crowds coming, it's probably what we imagine times 10 in terms of intensity and density. It's just the hustle and bustle, everybody there.
Thought that came to my mind was related to work. That one of the books that I've read in the last couple of years was called Deep Work, and it was focused on separating time in order to accomplish something big, a bigger project, a more important project, whatever. And the emphasis was get rid of all the distractions, you know, turn off everything and just focus on this one thing. I think about that in the professional life, and when I try and institute that discipline, it helps tremendously. But you know, through this, I'm thinking about it from the spiritual life. That you know, the deep work, the separation from everything else that's out there, and a complete focus on the most important, you know, important task right in front of us. I mean, that's our relationship with Christ and our you know, our not only our status as forgiven, but our call to be his servants as well. I see a parallel here that it's important to take that separate time and have some real deep work with Christ.
I read a quote by Nathan Foster recently, which is a paraphrase of a famous quote by his dad, Richard Foster. His dad said that superficiality is the curse of our age. Nathan Foster, his son, came back and said, today, distraction is the curse of our age, and that what the world desperately needs is present people. And I know in my own life, I'm a type A. I'm kind of like you, Matt. I'm not an extreme introvert, but I always want to be doing things, and I make my list. And even if I do something that wasn't on the list, I'll go back and put it on the list so I can cross it off. But it's easy for me to be distracted by the things I'm doing and not really be present to self or God or others. And Nathan Foster argued that distraction is one of Satan's greatest tools these days, because we never come to reckon with who we are and what our relationship to others is. And it's perhaps easier to be distracted today than at any other time in history, just because of all the stuff. I mean, people have always been distracted, but it's awfully easy today.
I think sometimes we as Christians too can spiritualize our distractions, because we may be distracted by a good thing. Well, this is a good project that I'm working on, or I'm doing this task. But even good things can be distractions from the larger mission of who we are and what we're going to do. And then, of course, on top of all the other things, like Jody said, that could distract us. I mean, we could turn off Zoom, and there's a million different things all of us could go do right now, immediately, whatever we wanted to. I mean, there's just so much to distract us.
Kind of building on what you just said there, Matt, I find it interesting that, you know, all those people were coming, you know, to hear Jesus, but he goes off. And then the next morning, he's like, let's go somewhere else because I can preach. He said, let's go to the nearby villages so I can preach there also. That is why I have come. And I feel like maybe the people there in Capernaum, you know, they heard that he was healing people. And so they were all coming to get healed, maybe overlooking the preaching part. And Jesus is like, the healing is good, but that's really not why I came.